Health, folks. This is your host, Charlie Dixon. Before we get started today, we would really like your help. Please rate and review our podcast with 5 stars and make sure to share it with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you so much for being an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. My guest today is Jon Steele. Jon is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has focused his practice on treating high-performance clients, including athletes and professionals. With personal experience as a former collegiate athlete, Jon combines the complexities of the athlete's experience with the performance of professional life. His specialties include treating anxiety, trauma, grief, addiction, and building mental fitness. Whether working with athletes or high-achieving professionals, he helps his clients combat shame, build healthy coping strategies, and increase self-compassion amidst high-pressure environments. We're thrilled to have Jon back with us as part of our clinician series, where today we're going to be delving into how to cultivate self-curiosity without harmful judgments, laying the groundwork for personal growth. Together, we'll explore the transformative power of mindfulness and self-compassion in reframing perfectionism, overcoming setbacks, building resilience, and integrating these practices into daily life to achieve lasting mental wellness and meaningful growth. Jon, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Graham, glad to be back. Excited.
No, I'm excited as well. Nice to see you and have you back as well. You know, as we begin, I'd love to have you start just with a quick summary from our last conversation on our podcast, which you listeners go back and listen to. I'd encourage you to do so. It was a great time together. But what does it mean to be curious about oneself without harmful judgments? And why is this so foundational to the work that we can do?
Yeah, I think, what we talked about last time, I think there was this tone to curiosity. That's probably one of the first things that I see is right off the bat when I maybe approach a subject or a topic or something that somebody's bringing up that's hard. Sometimes I hear the harshness coming out from them and I might take a second. I might say, hey, let's maybe take a second with curiosity here. Let's just be curious about it. I mean, I think what I've seen and shared a little bit too was just how that tone literally brought a calm within. And I could see it from clients, clenched and up here to it just dropping.
Right.
And they're saying, okay, I think that's doable. I think that's one of the things that I find is that it feels like it's something that I can do. I can ask questions about it.
Very good.
So I think that's one of the things.
Yeah. So I know people come in typically to see it's because they're stuck in something, and they're looking to get unstuck. And I think oftentimes, professionally, especially with some of the people that you work with, the high performers, the athletes, the professionals, we're wound, they're wound pretty tight. And you're talking about how can we begin to kind of loosen that up a wee bit, but to do it safely and invitingly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think right off the bat, just that tone changes when you start to use the word curious, even different than criticism, some of these things that are very helpful, and needed. And that's the thing of whether high performer or an athlete, there's constant feedback that's happening. Sometimes it's right on the field, right, where you get that constant feedback. And sometimes it's from the coach. I feel that's very true in other high performing positions as well. From, the healthcare facilities and whatnot. But that kind of curiosity, I think, gets a chance to be more of the self-reflective.
Right.
Bring a little kind of breath to the situation versus what you're talking about, the wound up, the tightness. So often that is what life is lived at, is that tightness.
It is. And I think oftentimes we don't recognize it becomes such a second nature for us. It's just our becomes
Mhm.
our normal, our
Yeah.
first go-to. So let's personalize this here. I come in to see you.
Mhm.
I'm a performing athlete. Maybe something's gone on, or I'm stuck. I'm hitting a
Mhm.
slump, or I want to perform better. And when I come to see you, how are you going to be introducing to me this practice of self curiosity and mindfulness as kind of our foundational tools for growth? Walk me through it.
Yeah. So one of the things is I think right off the bat, we take a little bit of a look at language. We take a little bit of a look that says, okay, how are you walking through this on a daily? How
Mm,
are you going through, and in this case, practicing or getting a chance to hear some of this feedback that is constant in your life? So it leads into the inner dialogue. So we can start talking about more of what's going on within. And usually it's naming at first some of these criticisms that are
mm,
happening in life. And some of them from a judge like perspective and how that tone can change. And so that's probably one of the first things we identify is okay, let's talk a little bit about some of this judgment that you might hear
yeah,
on a consistent
yeah.
basis.
I would imagine I'm coming in to sit with you, and I might have a little awareness
Mhm.
around what this internal narrative may be, but I might be hearing my coach. I might be hearing, my own motivational messages to myself, but probably I'm not appreciating just how critical and probably negative they are. Even probably words of encouragement probably have a negative edge to them.
Mhm.
Are you
Yeah.
finding that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, that's where that negative edge and that difference, I think I speak a little bit here on that tone and sometimes being able to observe that differently. So one of it is that's kind of my spot. I might be that for them in that moment is a chance to say, hey, let's take a second, and let's speak about whether it's that encouragement that you might hear or that criticism that you might hear. And let's maybe see how that can be said differently or in a
Mm,
different tone.
mm,
Because I do think that is such that's so a part of the natural society life,
yeah.
that's so a part of the environment. And so I think that's probably one of the things that I see that makes a difference.
Part of what you're emphasizing right here is that oftentimes is, high performers, if you will, or just, in general in life, because we tend to hear the negative more than we do the positive. I mean, very rarely do you, walk by your children's room and you see them playing well, and very rarely do you say, "Hey, you guys are doing such a great job. So
Hmm.
proud of you guys
Hmm.
playing so well." We don't catch kids being good. We don't catch ourselves being good. We're always,
Yeah.
kind of trying to refine and being better and, Kaizen and all of these things, which are good in and of themselves, but they usually have a negative piece to them.
Hmm.
And so I know I would imagine in my head, I come sit in front of you and I'm on your couch and you're saying, well, do you have any coulds, or shoulds or oughtos
Hmm.
in my, and I'm saying, absolutely, I got some of those. But
Hmm.
I think those are motivating for me. But what you're saying is that maybe, Graham, could you recognize maybe some harmful judgment patterns here that actually may not be as helpful as you might think they are?
Hmm.
So talk with me about these initial steps towards that, maybe even a compassionate way of looking at something, which
Yeah.
actually maybe can be more motivating and uplifting than I might think that negative message might be.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you nailed it when it comes to the criticism,
Yeah.
because I think criticism is one of those things. In this case, more of that harmful criticism, that edge to it,
Yeah.
because that is motivating. That
Yeah.
there's no question about it, right? It works to an extent. And I think that's the part that when you start bringing that up to people, they
Yeah.
recognize, and there's a little bit of this, "No, I can't do that." What are you talking about? I can't take away that voice, right? If I
Right.
take away that voice, then I'm not going to be able to get anything done. I'm
Right.
not going to be able to compete like I used to. I'm not going to be able to perform. So there is this spot where there is a decision that is made,
Uh,
and that switch that you talk about, instead of it being this negative, harsh tone,
mm,
what something like compassion can bring in those moments.
yeah.
And it reminds me as well of, so like self compassion, right? There's a concept, mindful self compassion. Kristen Neff is kind of a pioneer in this. She does some awesome stuff. And one of the things that she's kind of written about is that exact difference between self-compassion and self-esteem.
Mm.
And how so early on there was this push for self-esteem, increase your self-esteem. And then it came to this idea that, wait a second, people aren't really making the changes that they want to.
Right.
And so the difference there being self-esteem was really based off comparison.
Yeah.
That it landed in that spot of, as long as I'm doing better than, I'm going to have an increased sense of self.
Yeah.
And where it fails is the mistakes. When you're not better
Why?
than.
Yeah. So why is that such a precarious place? And that's where we fail. Name that piece.
Yeah. So if you're saying if I'm following you, right, Graham, when you're saying why the fail part.
Why is that an area of vulnerability? Because what you're saying is it can work to a point. That's a
Mhm.
really good point you're making, that this kind of self-criticism and critique, it can work to a point, but at some
Yeah.
point it's diminishing returns, or it becomes negatively impacting. The return on that kind of way of
Mhm.
motivating oneself actually becomes deteriorating of our sense
Yeah.
of self, and makes us vulnerable.
Mhm. Yeah. And right. And I think the comparison piece is that spot where it fails.
There it is. Okay.
Right? The comparison piece, because, the reality of life is there are people
Yeah.
that are better,
Yeah.
in the performance areas of life. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's the way that it is. And I think, though, with the comparison, it starts to really be a center of all of the other things that you can deal with. The comparison brings the anxiousness, right, at an unhealthy rate, right? And there is a part there, if you can make that switch from comparison to compassion, it's a within process.
Yeah. That's
It's
good.
then moving from I am enough instead of I am not enough. Like that comparison is a constant motivation of I'm not enough. I'm not
Yeah.
enough. I'm not enough. And so that can be very driving
Yep.
until it gets,
Until it's not.
yeah. So
Until
it's not.
until it's impeding, until it becomes
Yep.
really a slippery slope for me
Yep.
that I am really struggling with. So I love this, man. So so I'm sitting in front of you. You're going to be asking me questions
Mm-hmm.
to help me begin to explore this inner dialogue. And you hear me say something like, my coach said this was really an important game, and
Mm-hmm.
had a really good last game, and he's really looking forward to seeing me produce in this game. And,
Mm-hmm.
he's looking for me to, throw this many pitches or to score this many
Yep.
points. And,
Yep.
I'm getting ready for this game coming up on Friday, and I'm really excited, and I think I can do it. I better do it, because they're looking to me, and the
Mm-hmm.
crowd's pretty excited. We sold more tickets this week because of what I did last week, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm a little anxious actually. Now
Yeah.
that I talk about it, what am I going to be doing?
The first thing that I would probably lean into is that moment of recognition,
Mm,
is that moment of awareness. I think in the idea of curiosity, I think I've really brought and recognized how important it is to be aware of what you are walking through in that moment. So as you, right, like I love the example, because right, as you're literally walking through it, you're
yeah,
finding the excitement, you're finding this like, man, I'm like doing it, right? This is great. I'm so excited. And then it starts to settle in of this comparison. Oh, but
I'm comparing it
I
to
am
myself this time, the way you're
right.
pointing it out. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right? Comparison to self. Like
Yeah.
I can probably hear some of the inner dialogue of what's happening in that moment of you, wait a second, I think I'm anxious about this.
Right.
It's naming that comparison piece is what's happening. And so that would be the first part is I'm saying, okay, I hear that. You're recognizing anxiousness, and that would be the moment of maybe being able to say, is it possible for us to be curious about that?
Yeah.
Like
So I
I
might say
wonder.
something like, I might say something in response to like,
Mhm.
yeah, you're right. I'm comparing myself to my last game.
Mhm.
I think I better hit the same bar. Actually, you know what? I feel like I need to exceed that last one because I just think I should. Shouldn't
Mm.
I?
Mm. I might ask, well, where do you feel like that could be coming from? Like who's telling you that you should?
I guess as an athlete, I think my coach is, he wants me to keep getting better. And as an athlete, I'm supposed to keep getting better. It's
Hmm.
always about improvement. And, you lift one more pound than your last lift, workout, or you throw one more strike than your last, game, or maybe you score two more points than than your last outing. Yeah, I think I'm supposed to get better.
Hmm. And I would be like, yes, you are,
Mhm.
at not the cost of you, right? Like in the cost there, the comparison, the burdening, because that's really what I hear
It is a
is
burden.
yes, getting better is such a positive thing. That is what we love to do, whether it's on the athletic field, right? Whether it's in these other environments, whether it's in life, it's such a cool thing to improve and to get
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
The burdening piece, though, that I hear is the question that I'm really curious about. Where did that burden come from for you? The burden of it's up to me to
Yes.
sell more tickets. It's up to me to, you know, perform at such a level that, I'm going to carry my team.
Yes.
I would be curious about that one. Tell me a little bit more about that one. That's
Mhm.
the direction I would start to head.
I love that. And you know what I find myself thinking as you're talking about this and leading me down this path is I get to a point where every time down the floor, dribbling the ball down, I think of what I got to do next. Or every time on the mound when I got through the next pitch, or maybe I'm in the business field,
Hmm.
and I've got to give another presentation,
Yep.
and it's got to be a slightly bit better with a new audience, and I got to grab them.
Mm-hmm.
I begin to think about that more than I am what I need to be doing, and I'm not in a zone anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you notice that?
Totally. You're out of it, right? That's exactly, I think, the way that you can get pulled from, that flow, the zone, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, when I think of the zone, right, coming from pitching perspective, right, there's like a couple of movies that just like present that. One of them is with Kevin Costner for The Love of the Game, where everything just goes silent. I mean, it's so beautiful. I just love it. Right. I think another one is, I can't remember if it's Legend of Bagger Vance or another one golf related, but you literally see everything just settle, right?
So
Stands are
cool.
gone. The people are gone. And that's what you're looking to do, right? In those moments, whether it's performing again on the athletic field, giving that presentation, I'm going to extend it to being with people, being with your
Mm.
family, being with your kids. That feel of this flow, that feel of this zone is something what I see is just being as present as you can be.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Continuing education is both a requirement and a learning opportunity, but finding the right CE provider can be challenging. AATBS, a triad company, offers continuing education for psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, counselors, and behavior analysts. CE courses are available both individually and as part of our new All Access Pass. All Access Pass provides a library of over 250 unique courses. That's more than 800 hours of CEs, with new courses being added every month. As a special offer, Behavioral Health Today listeners can save 15% on CE purchases. Visit us at aatbs.com/BHT and enter promo code BHT15 during checkout. That's aatbs.com/BHT. Check out our library and check off your CE requirements today.
That's really good. So that's a curiosity that you're using to, for lack of a better term, kind of interrupt my inherent and maybe natural judgment
Mm-hmm.
that allows me to be kind of curious about maybe reflecting on what could it be,
Yeah.
moving maybe away from what if I'm not good enough to what might you introduce for me to kind of think about and kind of maybe even mantra around.
Yeah, I think instead of the right, I'm not good enough piece, it can
Yeah.
lead into this spot of, doing the best I can is
Mhm.
one of those phrases, one of those mantras that I've leaned into those moments.
Yeah.
I think what it can do is it can bring you to the present a little
Yes.
bit more, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the focus of all the other things that you're naming, right? I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to make sure that I am,
Yes.
preparing for all these things that you don't know could or could not be.
Yeah.
Instead of it's, I am here and I am doing the best I can. I think is one of those that I realize can really bring you back into the present. So it makes that shift a little bit. If you can move into that, we'd love the I'm doing the best I can to also lead to I am enough. That takes some work though. There's no doubt sometimes, right? To be able to get into the I am enough portion of life as well.
One of the things that's striking me right now as you're talking, I'm thinking about how haunting and how distracting the what ifs, what if I don't get this next pitch, or what if I miss this next shot, or what if, people begin to kind of doze off during my presentation, or the what ifs are looking into the future. And what you're describing right now is, why don't you bring it back to the moment? How are you doing in this moment? Expound upon that a wee bit for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the moment piece, I think, is also a practice. Bringing yourself back into the moment. I think that's where I've been doing, I think, a little bit more research and just embracing the, grounding pieces of one, whether it's some meditation pieces, right? The breath related things that you can do. But the more that you can be in the present, I think that's something that allows you to experience life in the ways that you'd want to experience life.
You bet.
And not get taken away, and I think that's whether it's sometimes the past, sometimes it's the future, but either one of those can have some of its moments of taking you away from, at least I'm trying to be here, right?
Yes.
Like this is my motivation, is to be here in this moment. And so I think that's the thing of what's so important to me, the breath.
Yeah.
I think I'm becoming more and more a fan of it.
Take that part and build upon that just a wee bit more. Using the breath as something we can do, something that could be a focus.
Yep.
And we can only focus on one thing at a time. If I'm focusing on that, tell me the benefit of that.
Yeah. The benefit is it brings you, hopefully, we're shooting to be back into that flow.
Yeah.
Right? Being here in this moment, because it is something you can do. One of the things that I've run into, I think, so much is when people feel like there are no options.
Yeah.
Right? When they feel like there are no options, they don't have something to do, the body is going to go at it. It's going to try its best to figure that out one way or another.
Yeah.
The breath is something that you can do. It's with you. It's there. It gives you a chance to then hone in on whether it is I'm going to breathe in through my nose and out through my mouth.
Yep.
And as you do that, being able to follow it gives you a chance to settle, I think, what could be going on. Because naturally so, right? When thinking about all the other things, your body is activated, right?
Yes,
It's going to be energized. And so I think there's so many of those components that the breath brings, from I'm going to do it in through my nose, out through my mouth.
Yeah.
I'm starting to sense a little bit of coolness every time I breathe. Right. I'm starting to, feel this as I exhale. I feel it in my stomach more. There's something along being able to just center in on the body for those moments that will bring you there. Bring you back.
Yeah, that's so good. When we're activated that way, and our minds so easily go towards the negative, don't they? When we get anxious, and when we get anxious, typically anxiety is kind of the perception of a threat. I'm not safe. And that's when, we get anxious in that place. And what you're talking about, the breath here being such a cool thing. One, it brings me, into the moment that I can control. And it restores something. When we breathe the way you're talking about, particularly on the exhale, in our nose, out our mouth, with a long exhale, that just calms the vagus nerve, which touches every, organ in our body and just resets everything. And we have access to it right then and there, anytime we want to do it. But we get kind of anxious, and we do this kind of chest breathing, where we begin to hyperventilate almost because we're feeling anxious.
Yep.
And it's almost like, hey, and I'm curious about this piece that you have too. Let's say, I have a little bit of a setback, and, I can go down that road of, just being hard on myself and criticism. How do you teach me to make a quick U-turn, and come back before I, beat up on myself too much? And I would imagine that breath might even be a part of that. Catching it early.
Yep. I think the ability to interrupt for a second, right? The ability to take a moment. And I think that's exactly what breath can do. is it can interrupt, right? That what I would probably say is, in this case, when you are headed in that negativity, right? That harmful negativity, that's something that's ingrained. It's happened for years. And so what you're practicing is you're practicing that ability to interrupt for a second.
Mm.
You're practicing this, okay, if I can pause this moment here,
Yeah.
if I can settle what is happening within the body and the mind, then I might have a chance as well to then move it in a different direction that I want to go, which in this case is maybe I am doing the best I can.
Yes.
I am enough. Being able to shift that. So I think the interruption is key, with what you're talking about. I think as well, I do is, try and reinforce that at the core of you are good.
Mhm.
You are, in this case, the things that you are going through, what I see them as is they're kind of these offshoots
Yeah.
that if left to just you are worthy, right? You are worthy of love and belonging and care and doing all of these things. And so these are little offshoots then when you go into negativity, they're not who you are.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another thing, of being able to bring it back to this curiosity. That's where curiosity connects to me,
Mm.
is it says, hey, we can be curious about these things because that's actually not who you are.
Yeah.
Who you are is, I am enough. That's who you are. Doing the best you can. That's who you are.
Right.
And so I think those are things, when being able to bring both of those things together, I've seen as a helpful way to be able to say, hey, let's pause a second. And let's remind ourselves that this is who you are.
Yeah.
That's why this is a little offshoot. That's why this is just, sticking out some way.
I love that. You're talking about almost two levels of working. One is kind of teaching someone in the moment how to deal with
Mhm.
adversity and that interruption, and kind of restoring a sense of control right then in that moment, because they got to perform. They got to throw the next pitch or make the next
Yep.
shot or
Yep.
talk about the next part of their presentation. They've got to perform in that moment, but I got to do it in a place that's restored back to that zone, back to my best self. It's not anxious. But you're also talking about a deeper meaning here, a self meaning here that is
Mhm.
critical, because we tend to think of I am what I do. Our identities more times than not tied with my
Yep.
success. What do you,
Yep.
tell us about yourself. I am or here's what I do. That's the first thing
Mhm.
we say. And so what you're doing right now is you're trying to separate. You are not what you do. What you do is separate from you, and you're really good at it. But
Mhm.
who you are is really separate. You
Yep.
tease the two apart.
Mhm. Mhm. We try, right? We try to, I think in that case, if giving an opportunity to share this difference, because that
Yeah.
separation can be really hard. It is ingrained as far as performance, right? What you do is who you are.
Yes, exactly.
And that, to me, is that separation. Being able to give that a second to be able to say, hey, let's take a look here, because what I'm seeing in you is different. I think that's the benefit sometimes that I get to do, is I get to take a second. I get to say, hey, like, I see this differently.
Yeah.
I see you as the person that does hard things, right? That's who you are.
Yeah.
This thing that maybe you didn't, and you deem that you didn't do as hard, or you could have done better. Yeah, maybe. And that's a little offshoot of who
Yes.
you are,
Yeah.
and I think that's the part of being able to really bring in that curiousness and different tone,
Yeah.
to it.
John, I would imagine that's challenging for some folks. And I would imagine in many ways, as you talk about that with relation to what brought them in as a presenting problem, let's say is
Mm,
performance related,
yep.
you're talking about some deeper therapy now where my
Mhm.
identity and my sense of self is based in, maybe what my parents reinforced or what, in school they reinforced, or my coaches, throughout my different leagues I played in have reinforced.
And
And my accolades, people don't see me for anything other than in the yearbook, what, my pictures on the sports teams or my debate
yep.
team or whatever it may be.
Yep.
And you're going down to a deeper level now, aren't you? Of
Mm,
you're not what you do. Who are you?
mhm.
Talk a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, maybe the challenges. Is that maybe what you're referring to, Graham?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because now you're introducing, wait a minute. I'm not what I do. And
Hmm.
and all these things that have defined me all these years mean there's something more to me because I've always linked these two very intimately.
Hmm.
And my performance is based on, or my sense of self is based on the performance. And now I'm a little scared because I never really looked at it this way. Do you find that happening in your work?
Hmm. Yeah. I think the fear that
Mm.
you're naming is probably one of the biggest parts. And some people can sit with that fear, recognize it, see it, and maybe be able to walk with it,
Yes.
allow for it to be. And then they can, I think, once they've seen that fear and that connection, then be able to see what's underneath, which I would say is who they are.
Yes.
So some people can, right? And then others just it takes time. It takes time. There's so much to a person's story. The complex, the complicated, the so many different ways of why maybe being able to see or feel or touch that fear a little bit is so hard.
Right.
I get a little snapshot. There's no way I don't even know where, and how much that could be for someone. But I think what I can recognize is I can say at the core of you, I see that you can walk through maybe some of that fear. It might not be now, it might not even be with me, but at some point I can see that as a possibility for you. But when you name the fear, I think that's right on. That's the
That's a
connection.
great, yeah, no, I love this kind of, you're filling it in. Give us a story of somebody you've worked with. And I'm using myself as an example to begin with, but give us a story, a real life story of someone coming
Hmm.
in and just a tremendous amount of potential, regardless of what they're doing, an athlete, professional in a high stakes kind of, realm, that's come in and saying, I'm better than this. I'm struggling. I'm stuck.
Mm.
Walk us through kind of what you've understood with them, what you began to coach them through, what you began to see emerge, and then what their life got to become because of their work with you.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, there's one particular that kind of jumps out, and I think with this, it's actually not necessarily in the sports world, but as far as high performing, it's more in healthcare
Yes.
and what that means to be in an environment that is very high pressured.
Mm,
And so I think with that specific person, there is a path that you saw of a lot of the stuck, a
mm,
lot of the language, right? When we talked about early on, this idea of, these shoulds that I should be doing, from I should be doing better in school to I should be doing, better when I am, present with patients or things like that.
yes.
And being able to start working with this, is it a should or is it a could?
Right.
Can we open that up a little bit? Can we give yourself a little bit of option?
Yeah.
And then once options started to pop in, then it was introducing some of the self-compassion. So
Mm,
let's talk about your inner dialogue, right? Let's talk about what you're hearing, what's going on. Let's do the exercise of how would you talk to a dear friend of
yeah.
yours in that moment of mistake?
Uh,
What tone would you use? How would you, what words would you use? Would it be words of encouragement or would it be
mm,
harsh judgment?
mm,
What's going on with that? And so then as we're moving into, some of these exercises, sometimes it's writing it out, an actual script, right? Of this is me, and then this is whatever part might be harsh right now, and you write it out. So you start to see it visibly and you start to get more and more of the, what I would say is awareness and the
mm,
curiosity. So
mhm,
as you become more and more aware, and as this person became more and more aware of what was happening, it became a change. Okay, where do I head now? Right? Like I'm starting to change these patterns a little bit. Where do I go? And so the conversation kept on being, well, leaning into this self-compassion.
mm,
Let's get into this self-compassion piece. Like, and I use the examples again from Kristen Neff. Can't say enough about her. Love her work. But there's some pillars that she uses, in the way that you speak to yourself, and self-kindness, being attached to common humanity, right, is another one, and practicing mindfulness,
mm,
right? So that breath and being able to really calm and settle. And so then it's starting to get into those as practices. And so then you start to lead into, I mean, it was recent where we connected. We had a session and you could see without me saying a word, you could just see them kind of spitting this stuff back,
Is that
you
right?
know, and catching things like whether it's the shoulds or
Yeah.
bringing out some of this self-compassion of like, yeah, you know, but I was talking to my other part and I was bringing this self-compassion
That's
and I'm
good, man.
like, heck yeah, you are. Let's
There you
go.
That's right.
Getting all excited with them.
That's right.
So, and I think what you then see as well is you start to see the continued hope, you know, that was so hard to see when you're stuck,
Yeah.
when you're walking through it, you know, and you know, and it happens too from all kinds of things to, you know, not performing in a way that you were trying to perform, you know, in this case, whether it was medically or with school or something like that, right? Or it's a life situation that happens, you know, the loss of a person or the loss of a relationship. Sometimes it's transition, it's moving, you know, all over the place and so many things that are a part of it. And so kind of walking through those. So
It's really good.
that's one that pops up.
I think that's a wonderful story. What you're also suggesting there at the end too is that once they begin to realize that they've got access to this and they can do this, it sounds like it has the opportunity to kind of generalize over into other areas
Mhm.
of their life too. I mean, this is portable. This way of thinking, it
That's
goes
a
with
good
us
way
in
to
a
put
way,
it.
doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Do you notice that piece too, that it generalizes over into other areas?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. You know, you can see, I think, and this is something for me as well. Like I'm trying to walk this myself as best as
Yeah.
I can, you know, throughout it. And I can see in the differences in the ways that I can be present in the moments that I want to be present or with the people that I want to be present. I think
Yeah.
for me, you know, and I'm a, you know, I'm a young dad, right? With a wife and I have little kids. And so for me, it's just one of those that I'm continuing to embrace, you know, this idea of can I, you know, I staying present, you know, with my kids, you know, being able to take them to soccer games and enjoy that, right?
You bet.
And not yell too much at what's happening. Try and calm that competitive spirit within me a little bit, but just be able to sit with them and see so many of the beauties, you know, that life
That's really
presents.
good. You know, as you help your, you know, the folks you're working with get to this place, you know, once we got it up there, we want to keep that up. How do you help them and encourage them to sustain this progress that they've worked so hard to get? They've done such a great job in getting. How do you help
Yeah.
them sustain and maintain that mindset of curiosity in an ongoing way?
The sustaining piece, I think, is a great one that I've recognized and maybe I've termed a little bit differently in
Please.
the concept of mental fitness.
Mm,
So I think that is one that I have embraced more and more and recognized, you know, as you're going deep into these things and you're experiencing healing and self-compassion and changing some of your language and tone, how is it that you continue to practice it?
yeah,
And I think that's the thing that I've
that's good.
recognized, whether it's the term, right? The phrase mental fitness can kind of have this click a little bit that says, hey, we're not necessarily focused right now in your mental health. Mental
Yeah,
health is important and it is needed and is something that we walk through in life. But as far as sustaining this, some things that
yeah,
you can take away and do, let's work on this mental fitness a little bit. Let's strengthen it a little bit. Let's kind of, you know, get that lifting going. And, you know, what does it mean breath wise for you throughout the week, right? What does that recognize? And as you're doing these things, keep curious, not judgmental, right? Like you just
yeah.
keep kind of bringing those pieces together. And so it starts to add up in the practices that you do.
That's so good. You know, as you're talking about these things, what I love is that these are attainable to everybody. It's not like, well, you know, if you're born this way,
Mm,
you can do it. If you're not, well, you know,
mm,
sucks to be you kind of idea.
mhm.
Instead, these are things that we can do, build in, and be responsible for that actually
Mhm.
has some really cool return on investing in them in the ways that you're describing. As we begin to wind down for today, I'd love you to leave
Mhm.
a word of advice for those just in general, whether they're athletes, high performers, or just, you know, are you know, all of us who in a day-to-day way
Mhm.
want to look to embrace maybe a greater curiosity and begin to kind of maybe take a step towards being less harmfully judgmental of ourselves. Give us a word on how to do that just today, maybe one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I would reach towards first in this curiosity place is I would probably go more towards how is it that you can find, I think in this case, some of this self-compassion is probably the part that I would reach towards. And
Okay.
as you're finding this self-compassion, can you be curious? And it all depends on where you're at with it, right? But can you be curious maybe with this term of self-compassion? And if you are familiar with this term self-compassion, how is it that maybe you can practice that within yourself, today? Can you take a moment, and maybe it's a mistake that happened
Mm.
today? Maybe it's like you had both of your kids that were in your ear and you're trying to get them to school today and you lose it, right? And I'm like, you just need to be quiet. Not that happened this morning at all, but right, it's one of those moments that then you can look back and can you say in that moment,
Yeah.
is there an opportunity for some compassion?
Gotcha.
Can you bring a little bit of something? And in this case, it would be can you bring something a little different? Can you be, curious about that and allow for that?
I love that because these are real world things. And as we drop the kids off at school today and we
Mm-hmm.
have a perfect morning,
Mm-hmm.
with no frustrations and no come on, get goings. And but our
Oof.
mornings are kind of helter skelter. But the good news
Yeah.
is
Tell me about when you find one of those.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the good news is we get to pick them up or
Yeah.
have them come home. And so we
Yeah.
get a second take, and we
Yeah.
get to say, okay, I did the best I could this morning and I was a little half
Mm-hmm.
cocked, but you know what? I got this afternoon. I get to do a
Yeah.
redo or a repair. And
Mm-hmm.
what do I want to be
Totally.
intentional about and go in with some breath, some
Yeah.
compassion, and put a different ending on that earlier beginning. So I love
Mm-hmm.
that, John.
Yep.
It's really good. Really
Yep.
good. Well, man, I always love our time with you, and I would love
Mm.
our folks that are listening to be able to have more time with you after today's show and find out more about you, your work. How can they follow up with you after our show today, including your podcast?
Yeah, that is one. It's been a fun venture for sure, and still plugging away. So the podcast would be Mental Fitness Stories with
Nice.
Jon Steele. So there's access there on YouTube. There's access in a lot of different platforms as well, as far as the listening portion. And so, man, that's just a fun one to be able to get out more ideas, be able to share. I know Graham, one in between me and you, is going to be dropping soon on that. So I'm excited
Look
about
forward to it.
that. And just being able to collaborate. So, but that's one. And then on the therapy end, my website is johnsteeletherapy.com. Can
Wonderful.
find me as well on Facebook. My Instagram is on Mental Fitness Stories, is what that one is. And LinkedIn is another one as far as Jon Steele Therapy. And so there's, there's a few places to
That's
track
awesome.
down if possible. But
I love it.
um,
I love it. Well, I would encourage our listeners to do so. You got some great messages. I know you got some great
mm,
guests on the show, and you got just a wonderful approach to folks, making
mm,
it safe and compassionately helping them tap
mm,
into their own compassion. So, man, I love having you on the show. It's great to be with you
mm.
today, and
Yeah.
thanks so much for our time together.
Hey, well, definitely appreciate it, Graham, for sure.
Also, want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining John and me today. It's always great to have you with us. And hey, by the way, we'd love to have you help spread the word about this podcast to help us grow and reach more people, allowing them too to discover the valuable insights that get shared in this show. To help us out in this way, please leave us a review and share this podcast with a friend if you would. We'd really appreciate it. And just as a reminder, our episode today and its resources, along with all of other episodes, can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on this show. And we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.